This is Lynn Davenport with Social Impact, and we're here today with a very special guest, Allison McDowell. Allison is not just a phenomenal researcher, and now you're making your way across the globe with all kinds of interviews I've seen you do, but you're also a friend, and you're a dear friend. Even though you're in Philly and I'm here in Texas, we do keep up with each other. And
I was born in Fort Worth. Did you know that?
Oh, I did know that. Yes, I forgot about that.
Actually, I have some roots. That's long way back.
Wonderful. And then wasn't there a Waco connection too? Didn't you tell me something? No,
I went to Wake Forest. Maybe that was the.
Oh, maybe. Yeah. Okay. Well, so Allison, the parallels here with the two of us, we both started in this research world because of education. So you and I are public school parents, and we've had kids go through the system, and both started seeing something. It was really the high stakes testing that got us involved, and started paying attention to the education technology coming in the schools. I know with your district, Boston Consulting Group came in and they were shutting down schools. So you and I did a podcast with Alice Linehan. She's the one who connected me to you. And we did that. And I think that was in 2016. So we were talking about artificial intelligence and education technology.
Hardly knew any of the stuff back then, though, Lynn. Can you believe it?
I know. It was really almost prescient. It's quite scary how spot on we were. And we didn't really understand what was coming with the pandemic and all, that it's been kind of a catalyst for what's coming down the pike. But I call this social impact as a play on words. This podcast was created really for me to expose the social impact investing, the pay for success schemes, the global impact investing network, which you have done more research than anyone, I think, out there. So I'm going to go ahead and let you just tell a little bit more about yourself, but we want to dive in and talk about how this is connected to Dallas and Texas and the United States and go beyond. So go ahead.
Yeah. So again, we go way back, and over this past year, it seems like increasingly many of the people that we were organizing with in the school space seem unable at this point. We're still hoping they'll come along into understanding this bigger picture. But there are some key folks like yourself and, that have made this jump, right? Like who understand the connection between schools and really what's coming up as a biosecurity state, like using biosecurity measures to turn people into, through predictive analytics, into these human capital bond products, which is, it sounds crazy, but that was an inherent part of when we first started. And we were both coming into it with the understanding of how do we try to protect the space of neighborhood schools, right? Public schools as a center of community. And over time, what I've realized is as we've moved into looking into educational technology, looking into this human capital investment markets, and, I remember early on seeing a report from Pearson that talked about artificial intelligence in education. It was a whole white paper. And
wait, I'm going to interrupt you for a second because Pearson, for the audience who may not know, Pearson is the one who provides our standardized test. That's the company that we had in with the high stakes testing, what we call the STAR test. Then we hired another company, and now we're back to Pearson. So go ahead.
Right. And so, so it's a lot of it's based in the UK, but it has connections here in the United States. And for a while when we were opposing testing, Pearson's like bottom dollar, started dropping out, and everyone's like, see, we're winning. But they didn't realize that the pivot was going to go from the end of year testing to essentially all the time engineering, like mind engineering through artificial intelligence and the way in which content was presented to students to actually track kids in very sophisticated ways onto as human capital on like workforce aligned pathways. And what we didn't fully get until I think really the past year and a half is that many people who have unimaginable power in the world, because this is a global enterprise, are imagining a future called this fourth industrial revolution where most work is automated. And so instead of education being a situation to work with kids and surface their talents and support them in developing themselves as human beings, essentially they know that there's not a future for most people. So they're going to try to almost miseducate. And in many respects, the system has miseducated certain subsets of people for a long time.
And so this is an access point in the schools. That's the connection there, is to access them earlier.
Because they're building a world that will run on artificial intelligence, that will be automated, where you become a program, essentially, that literally they are going to program human life and social relations and what our futures are. And they want children to accept that. And so bringing them in through K-12 education, but even more so in pre-K and Head Start, and then bringing them into what they call a lifelong learning model, so that they're always being engineered by digital technologies that increasingly have connections to people's like neural interfaces, like through gaming technologies. They're trying to shape the future generations to accept a world where being human and having agency and having freedom is anathema, right? And so they know that if people recognize that, no one would want it. And so in the meantime, and in retrospect, what I've realized is they were keeping us busy as public school parents, fighting the charter school parents, fighting the homeschool parents, fighting the kids in parochial school, fighting the kids in private school. And we were all fighting for this shrinking pie and sort of pointing fingers. We were meant to point fingers at one another for making the bad choice and taking away our choices, when in reality, this artificial intelligence machine is coming after all of the children, no matter what school program you're in. And maybe the ones in the most affluent private schools will get to be the data analysts and run everybody else as human capital, and they'll be slightly better, but it will be a soul-killing future.
Right.
And so to me, in this stage of my journey, I'm like, how do we build those bridges, right? Because we've been trained into little boxes and to not step back and see the bigger picture. So I don't know. Does that help? Does that
absolutely? And so I think that when we're talking about things like pre-K, it appeals to those who we know they take whatever the social ill, they take a legitimate social ill, but then they co-opt it, they distort it, they pervert it. And so pre-K on the surface looks like something that would be good. If you need childcare for your child, then pre-K would be an opportunity for you to put your child in, this push for universal pre-K and free pre-K. But when I realized it was something possibly sinister is when I started seeing the left and the right. It used to be the right would say, no, the child should be at home with their parents or their mother or their grandmother. And now you're seeing both parties pushing forward bills. And that's when it usually, my radar goes up. It's because it's an access point and because people have gotten to those legislators to say.
And home visits, because that's even earlier for pregnancies. They want to go all the way back, really almost in utero.
So it's womb to tomb. This is womb to tomb. They talk about cradle to career. It's womb to tomb tracking, womb to tomb access. And you're exactly right. And so when we come back, we're going to talk about, we talked about they. I want to talk about who's the they, because my husband always makes a joke. Who's the they? And I'm like, well, I'll tell you.
We know the they.
We know the they. We're going to name the they when we come back, right back. This is Lynn Davenport. You're listening to Social Impact. I have my special guest, Allison McDowell, talking about impact investing, pre-K. And so when we were talking in the last segment, it was, who's the they? Who are we talking about when we talk about they are doing this, they are doing that? There's the global they, which is the UN Sustainable Development Goals. There's the national they, which I would say Strive Together is probably one of the biggest, what's the word? The imposers, the champions of collective impact. And then at the local level, and in Dallas, we have a former Goldman Sachs executive who made his money in the real estate crash and in that whole catastrophe of 2008, and then moved into the education space with a nonprofit called Commit. Commit is a collective impact division, subsidiary of Strive Together in Cincinnati. So I know that you and I have done a ton of research on this. You came to Dallas, you stayed with me in January before the pandemic hit, and we had a sense of urgency, but I don't think we quite realized that this pandemic would be used as a catalyst to really force this.
Right around the Ides of March, and that painting in Old Parkland of the Ides of March in the debate room.
Right. So talk about they and the local they and the national they, and go ahead.
Yeah. So essentially what people have to sort of set aside their understanding of normal reality, because what in the finance world, normal reality doesn't count. All that counts is that they can create data and numbers and analytics that is a way of gambling, legalized gambling, a very, very powerful interest to create money in the stock market. And so what happened, as you mentioned, in the last global economic crash around real estate and housing, they created debt commodities that they could package up in tranches and sort of spackle together and try to make them look nice and attractive and then sell them to unknowing buyers. And what we have to realize is that 10 plus years on, the wealth is even more concentrated, and the only debt commodity that would be bigger than real estate and housing is human capital, is actually people. And so they're going to reframe people's relationship to their government, and this is global, this isn't just the United States,
right,
as through electronic government, through digital citizenship that will be connected to these medical passporting systems, these biometric identity systems. You will be created as a debt instrument. And some people who are more into the sovereignty movement already sort of know this as this straw man idea, but it's sort of like the straw man coming out into the open. And they have worked with universities, prestigious universities, to make equations that profile people as debt burdens. And I will say, so for the pre-K space, people should look up the Heckman equation, Heckman. James Heckman is a Nobel Prize winning economist. He was funded by George Soros and J.B. Pritzker, the governor of Illinois, to say that they could get a 7 to 10% rate of return on early childhood investing. And that's home visits, pre-K, third grade test scores, all of this. But it's all runs on data and profiling, and almost pre-crime. Not crime, but predictably profiling people as having something wrong with them, even though they don't. But they've used the data to create a perception. And then they use an intervention, a solution, oftentimes an educational app that extracts data, because this all runs on data to scale. And so the Heckman equation is the centerpiece of this for the early childhood, and also later will be for workforce reskilling, lifelong learning.
Well, and it's very important for me to tie this into the local level, because I think when we talk about these things, people think, oh, that's happening out there. That's not touching me. But as you have proven, it's happening here in Dallas, and they've written in Dallas Morning News citing James Heckman and the Heckman equation, and how it's in the Commit partnership. That's their hero. That's how they're basing this whole model on this return on investment. But people would, so the devil's advocate would say, oh, but that's good. You invest in pre-K, of course you're going to have positive results. But what we're talking about is complete access to those children, putting them on a device, or whether it's homeless people or pre-K children, or
I'll tell them about the surveillance play tables. That would probably make sense. So what Heckman has said, he and J.B. Pritzker went on sort of a dog and pony show up and down California to pitch it to all the community foundations. Because while a 7 to 10% or 13 if they have health data doesn't seem enormous, it's a nice tidy sum for like an endowment portfolio. So they were selling it all up and down California several years ago. And what they said to these investors, they said, well, we can't actually change cognitive data, which is like your intellect, because IQ hardens up around the age of 8 to 10. And for these derivative markets, they need movement. They need the data to move, because someone's betting for you and someone's going to short you and bet against you. They said that the point of opportunity was non-cognitive data was character, was their mental state, these big ocean 5 traits. This Otis software system, they said that the guy who's working with Heckman on Otis and these map tests, he said, are we going to tell, as a former principal in a suburban Illinois public school, am I going to tell parents we're tracking their kids' neuroticism?
No.
Nope. And so in the pre-K space, what this looks like is Hatch Education has surveillance play tables.
So this is why the Montessori has now been hijacked by this. They'll actually use all that sensory stuff that people think, oh, Montessori's good. They're bringing it into the public schools, but they're going to be doing it with a digital component like what you're talking about with the surveillance and the sensory.
Right. So like there's a franchise outside of Boston called Wildflower Montessori where they have the children wear those felt slippers, but they put a sensor in so they can track where they are all day.
Well, and remember the Lena that they're doing in Dallas, that Lena with the toddlers. So Lena is a device that Flavio Cunha with the Rice University invented, this thing that attaches to a toddler's little onesie, and it tracks the amount of words the baby hears in a day. And so, I mean, we have to have a device to tell people to talk to their children? It's ridiculous. And then that's measured by someone.
Device in their house, and it has radiation on those babies' stomachs, which is terrible.
But everyone says, but you got to talk.
Hatch play tables are being used at Educare, and I don't know if Educare is in Texas yet, but they were being used on these fisheye cameras on the play tables where children had to play together with other children, and then their social behaviors were scored. Mm-hmm. And there were rubrics that were attached to this. This is Head Start children. So it's not about making lives better for these children.
No, but they use human-sounding words and human-sounding human desire, and the things that we know to be important as an access point, and then they can push these programs, and they're usually done at the local level. They're done through public-private partnerships, which we talked a lot about on this show.
And with United Way too. The United Way is a central partner with Strive Together,
and United Way is a big player in Dallas. They are in this whole nonprofit industrial complex. United Way is central to it, and as you and I know, United Way was working with Goldman Sachs and that pre-K in Utah. And of course, the connection I told you about with
data sharing. They want to have data sharing agreements with all sorts of partners for wraparound services. So not just the school base, but food assistance, housing assistance, mental health assistance, all of these things are going to be packaged as verticals to be put on a data dashboard. And that's where the Ballmers come in, because Connie Ballmer, Steve Ballmer's wife, is on the board of Strive Together. And they're with Blue Meridian Partners, which is putting a huge amount of money into this space, like billions of dollars. And I know Steve Ballmer came to Dallas.
He did. And the Dallas Morning News, it's always, it gives me these people don't hide they're crazy. They brag about it, and they post, and they feature articles about it because they have direct access. Todd Williams is now a funder of our education lab, which is the Dallas Morning News's education writers. And so all the articles then, of course, they're funded by him. So, of course, they're going to be steered in the direction that is the narrative that he wants to put out there. And Steve Ballmer did come to town. He's the former CEO of Microsoft, and now he's investing in these education programs at the local level. This is what it looks like. Is
run these dashboards. I'm trying to remember which one his is. If it's social solutions, there's social solutions. There's one that Salesforce has, and then there's one that Ballmer has. But it is about turning people's lives into data on dashboards and then engineering it.
Well, and with the kids, I know that with the testing that they're reducing the children to those data points and the teachers to the data points, putting it all on a dashboard. Teachers this will resonate with them because the teachers know it's all about that data. And they'll say, well, if you don't have that access to the data, then how can you know where you are? Well, as a teacher, they know because they can see that student with their eyes and see the human interactions, but you reduce it all to data points. And of course that reduces the human connections. And so when we come back, I want to talk about solutions, because I've been watching how you have gone up against this global beast, and your voice is really it has been magnified in ways I never would have imagined, going back thinking about how when we met and all these years. I am really I'm amazed at what you've been able to do, because you are focusing on the heart and the human connections and teaching people how to do that at the local level. So we'll come back. Okay, we're back with Social Impact. This is Lynn Davenport. I'm here with my guest, Allison McDowell from Philly. And so I want to, before we dive into the social impact of all of this and some solutions, I want to talk about the biotech piece of this, because that Commit partnership and a charter school called Uplift and some other impact organizations are now moving into this biotech hub. It's 23 acres in Dallas. It's in the old Pegasus Park. It's where Logan's Run was filmed, this creepy dystopian film about how people would they die at 30 years old, and it's awful. But I thought that was interesting. It was filmed there. But this the biotech piece of this is important because I think it ties into their wanting access to the data and baby brains and pre-K brains and student brains. So talk about that real quick, and then we'll go into the social impact and the solutions.
Yeah. Well, so the Heckman equation gets up to 13% rate of return if you get health data. And I've understood for a while that, again, things that sound nice, that if you dig into them, you realize the intentions are not well met.
Like community schools or...
in the community schools, the plan is to create more and more medical services in the schools. And often these are schools in urban areas that have health clinics, public clinics in other places, but they need it in the school because they've gutted FERPA, which is the student data privacy that was done under Obama. So if these interventions happen, especially concerning about mental health, data being collected in ways that could be used to serve impact markets and predictably profile children and their families, especially if we know that big pharma is moving into digital therapeutics and gaming for behavioral therapies and different things like that. If families don't want to go that route, then do they risk having, child protective services or something come when the medical stuff is brought into the school? And now is that we're looking for increased testing, medical testing that's happening in schools in terms of accessing schools, like the Los Angeles Daily Pass, where children are supposed to have, and even in Philadelphia, there's this COVA Pass, different things where you're supposed to, essentially share your, biological material in order to access school. People have to understand that is actually driving global markets in biotech, really that genomic material.
And biotech is just
it's about building these markets for biotech products.
And biotech is the intervention from man. What is biotech? What is the biotechnical definition?
Essentially, it's engineered life. It's using engineering systems, increasingly electrical engineering, and that's where the nanotechnology comes in to treat people's cellular structures as computing systems. And so if we understood, the way we did 3 or 4 years ago, that they were using the technology, digital media, to engineer mindsets, to engineer even neural pathways in your brain. Now, with nanotechnology or biotherapeutic interventions, they can start to actually engineer people at a cellular level. And whether people have full awareness or ability to give informed consent, especially when that applies to children, especially when that applies to interventions that are still under, experimental use.
All of this is closely tied.
Questions that come into that, and we have to understand really that schools, educational settings, are becoming sites of data harvest.
And this ties in with the transhumanism movement, which we know is directly connected to the biotech industry, and so when thinking about from the human to human perspective, the threat to our humanity. Let's talk about the social impact of these schemes, these pay for success schemes, these social impact bonds, the Heckman equation, all of this. What's the social impact of that?
Well, I truly feel, when we waded into this, we didn't know how deep it went, right? And so, last year we had a handle on the technology, the surveillance, the finance, the austerity. We didn't really understand the biotech, and the military R&D behind it, and we didn't understand this idea of parallel digital worlds that they're building. And I was in touch with teachers from Tokyo who are expats at an international private school, and they said, you need to read this moonshot paper. And I encourage people to look it up. It's the Japan Science and Technology Agencies, the government of Japan, that works with SoftBank, which is the largest innovation fund in AI and robotics, and also Nippon Telegraph and Telephone, which is 6G. After 5 is 6, and that's the digital twinning, is to remake the world into a parallel digital universe. And it's crazy that I even have to talk about that, but I think we do.
Well, look at how the teachers create their avatars.
For me, it became not simply standing up to this financial apparatus, but it became a spiritual engagement. Because if what they're talking about is to fundamentally change the evolutionary trajectory of life on Earth into an electrically engineered abomination without anyone even having a say into what's happening, how do we stand not only for today's children, but the unborn? I mean, how do we stand for the other beings on this planet that don't want to be sucked into an online computer simulation video game run by the military and hedge funds? So we don't have Goldman Sachs's money, and we don't have DARPA's tools, but I feel very strongly, increasingly as someone who did not have a very deep faith practice, and I know that that's something that you lean on very heavily, that this is a spiritual engagement here, and it's a global engagement, and it's a global peace movement of moms around the world to stand against this. And no matter what your faith practice is, because it is global, if you are authentically connected with that source, with your creator, with that greater power, that is what enables us to stand and face this. And I think a lot of this, because it's electrical engineering, which is so interesting about Dallas, which I didn't fully appreciate the tech aspect of both Dallas and Austin, it's vibrational, it's waves. And faith and love is vibrational. It resonates. There's a frequency to it. And they want to keep people in a fearful, angry, low frequency.
And 6 feet apart.
About this, but I think it is how we lift up. And part of what I've talked about this, it came to me, I work at a garden, and it's these dandelions. It's like the humble, beautiful dandelions, and they're scrappy, and they crack the sidewalk, and they
break through, right? And they still
and they're
thrive.
medicinal, and they're healing. And so I've asked people to send me. I just got some today from the Jersey Shore. I got some a couple days ago from Seattle. I have people say they're sending them to me from other countries, and we're using these dandelions to go up against the faux social impact, which is antisocial, which is anti-life, and it's running through the central banking systems, I will say, which is also Dallas. And I'm going to get a big pile of dandelions, and we're going to scrub the thresholds or the steps up to the Federal Reserves and say, we're not doing this.
We do not consent.
Those of us who are in a position of seeing it, we're not doing it. And we're carrying the good intentions of all the people who sent us dandelions out here and nature and the natural energetic system to say no.
Well, I got an interesting God wink about dandelions. This woman had contacted a writer in Dallas, and he's like, "Oh, this is right up your alley, Lynn." And I look at her email, and it's Dandelion Something or other. And I thought, "Oh, Allison would love that." Breaking through, she's like, "I'm moving to Texas, and I want to get involved in the local level in the schools and stuff." Yeah, so interesting. But
I will say, so Tom Cowan, who's been a real inspiration to me, he talks about Rapunzel and the sleeping princess, who pricks her finger, and all the people, and the castle gets surrounded by brambles, and all the knights come and they try to hack their way through, and they get torn to shreds, and they all die. And then a few years later, another guy comes up, and all the villagers are like, "Don't do it, don't! It's not going to work out," And he stood there and he said, "I'm not afraid.
Yeah,
I'm not afraid." And then the brambles rolled back.
Now, we do have the power as mothers. We're closest to the children, and we're up against a very wicked force. We know that this is a battle between good and evil, and it is a spiritual battle, and we will come out ahead. We know that. I know that from a spiritual and from the fiber, every fiber of my being. I know that God wins in the end, but as we are here on this earth, we have to go up against this. We have to do it. We have to protect our kids, and it does. And I'm frustrated that so many of my allies, like you, are in other parts of the country. So it's difficult to find or people that understand this at the local level. But I'm trying to, that's part of the reason for this, is to educate people at the local level to see that this is really hairy, ugly stuff. But we do have options, and there are things that we can do to say we do not consent to this. We resist this. And but I want people to know where to find you. And you've got this magnificent blog, and it's and that just doesn't even do it justice.
My journey, right?
It is, but it's you're a writer. You really
wrenchinthegears.com.
Wrenchinthegears.com. Yes, and that's what we are. We are a wrench
channel with a lot of talks, and people are like, I have to listen to like 20 20 of your, somebody just said, I've been listening to your talks for 2 weeks straight. I have a lot of material. So if you stick with it, like you'll figure it out.
You will. Know? And I always tell
my name, Allison McDowell on YouTube.
1 L, Allison with 1 L.
Lison.
Mm-hmm. And so I mean, there's so much that we could talk about, and I want to have you back on, and maybe we'll go deeper into
we need to talk about Dallas County Promise.
Yeah, it's a false promise with their $1 billion bond, and I'm going to say that real quick is that they're bringing in the green light credentials, and they're doing that through the DCCD, the community college, and the Dallas County Promise through Commit is tied in with them. So yes, this is pre-K through the workforce.
Don't put people on blockchain.
Amen. And Dallas is a big central player in the blockchain industry and movement.
Austin.
And people will say, and Austin, yes, true. And people will say, oh, but this is the panacea to fix all these issues that we have. Put it on the blockchain and nobody can hack into it. But you have been able to present proof and facts that this is not a good thing. We do not want to put people on blockchain, and we do not want to buy into these false promises of the blockchain. And so maybe that's the next thing we'll talk about when you come back on. So thank you so much for coming. And I so value your friendship and what you're doing for people across the country and the world, because you've got worldwide reach. And
it is global. And so that's the thing. Nobody wants a transhumanist future where we live as cartoon characters run by the military. We don't. So if we can just actually convince people what's happening, nobody wants it. I mean, it's unifying. It's incredibly, and in the thing of the day, we were coming from kind of different parts of the spectrum. But when you care, when you know it's about life and love, that brings people together.
That's right. All right. Well, thank you so much, Allison, and we'll talk soon. Okay, bye.
Bye, Lynn.